Bloodborne is probably the most wanted, most requested, most heavily anticipated remaster for a video game in the history of video games. On the 24th of March 2025, Bloodborne will officially turn 10 years old. And even after almost 10 years, the company that's renowned for pushing remakes and remasters that literally no one asked for still hasn't done anything with Bloodborne. You likely don't need me to tell you that Bloodborne is From Software's greatest achievement. Yeah, that's right, even with Elden Ring now being a thing, which is a masterpiece in its own right. For me anyway, I still believe that Bloodborne is the greatest From Software game to grace gaming. However, the Bloodborne credit doesn't just solely go to From Software, it was also co-developed by Japan Studio, which is a first-party studio by PlayStation. Unfortunately, this studio shut down in 2021 and went on to become Team Asobi. While a lot of the heavy lifting was done by From Software, the actual Bloodborne IP is owned by Sony PlayStation. If we were living in a timeline where Bloodborne was solely owned by From Software, there's not a single doubt in my mind that as of right now, we would most definitely have a Bloodborne remaster or remake. For years, gamers have been curious as to why Sony haven't done a single thing with Bloodborne, and it's not even to the point of a remake, just a simple remaster, bumping that resolution and getting an FPS increase to 60 frames per second, considering that when we look at other From Software games, the Dark Souls series, Elden Ring, as well as Sekiro, all of these games have received updates along with the 60 FPS boost on console. There's many theories that float around out there, like it just wouldn't be financially beneficial for From Software to take on another contract from Sony to further enhance Bloodborne or to remake it. And also that From Software like to release their games multi-platform, Sony would no doubt want to keep Bloodborne exclusive to the PlayStation platform. The infamous one that tends to pop up quite often is that the actual source code for Bloodborne was lost through the closure of Japan Studio. Personally, I don't latch on to this one. It's not the early 2000s anymore, and I don't think a company as big as Sony and a studio as important as Japan Studio would simply just throw away important source code, especially for a super popular money milker like Bloodborne. This want for something more to happen with Bloodborne has also increased furthermore since Elden Ring's come out. A lot of people that previously weren't fans of the Souls-like genre or the From Software Souls games have suddenly started to latch onto these games because of Elden Ring. So this means that the actual financial gain for Sony to do something more with Bloodborne right now would be furthermore than what we saw with the return of Bloodborne back in 2015. Sony absolutely know that people want something more from Bloodborne. The game has also appeared in 4 Sony first-party games since its release: Little Big Planet 3, Ghost of Tsushima, God of War, and the recent Astro Bot. So it certainly is still a series that Sony are proud of, they just don't really want to do anything else with it. For the first time ever, Soulsborne director Hidetaka Miyazaki finally spoke on Bloodborne this year. When he was asked about Bloodborne possibly receiving a remake or remaster by IGN, he said here, unfortunately, and I've said this in other interviews, it's not in my place to talk about Bloodborne specifically. We simply don't own the IP at From Software. For me personally, it was a great project and I have a lot of great memories for that game, but we're not at liberty to speak to it. He also mentioned to Eurogamer that he's very happy that there are still passionate fans for Bloodborne, and he suggested that the game would benefit for a release on more modern hardware. So this really is just further confirmation that the fate of Bloodborne and what happens to it is literally within Sony's hands. For the time being anyway, this pretty much means that anything additional, especially towards getting Bloodborne running at 60 frames per second, has been left in the community's hands. Back in 2020, Lance McDonald found a way to reverse engineer the Bloodborne engine by changing a line of code to enable the game to run at either 720p 60 frames per second or 1080p 60 frames per second. And this was insanely groundbreaking to see Bloodborne almost running at a kind of reliable 60 frames per second on the PlayStation 4 Pro, and seeing this in action was the stuff of dreams. I don't think the masses are too concerned about Bloodborne receiving a resolution boost, even though the game would definitely benefit from it, as Bloodborne's atmosphere is simply incredible, but to just be able to play the game at 60 frames. Now, the game didn't run at a constant 60 frames per second on the PlayStation 4 Pro, but a year after, it was finally made possible to play Bloodborne at 60 frames with a more consistent 60 on the PlayStation 5, as demonstrated by Digital Foundry. In their video, they also applied some AI upscaling to upscale the footage recorded to 4K. This doesn't mean that Digital Foundry were playing the game at 4K, they were still playing it at 1080p, but the footage recorded was upscaled. And the result is incredible. I mean, this is the closest look we have to a Bloodborne remaster. Now, the average Joe isn't going to be able to experience this because you're required to jailbreak your PlayStation 4 or 5 in order to make this possible. The alternative method for years has always been emulation. If it was possible to be able to reliably emulate PlayStation 4 games, then looking at Bloodborne, which would be one of the sole reasons as to make PlayStation 4 emulation possible, this would mean that we would be able to play Bloodborne at a native internal resolution of 4K and at a constant 60 frames per second. The game may even be able to see further enhancements through the use of mods like dynamic shadows or improved anti-aliasing. Throughout this year, the team responsible for Shad PS4, a PlayStation 4 emulator, has been making some incredible progress, to a point now where with version 0.2.1, Shad PS4 can play Bloodborne. The footage that you guys are seeing is Bloodborne running at 720p internal resolution recorded at 4K, running at 60 frames per second. Now, this emulator is still very much a work in progress, though it has been said that sometime by the end of the year, this emulator should be able to reliably play Bloodborne. As it stands, there are a lot of issues with emulating Bloodborne currently. However, this is insanely impressive just considering that it was only a few months ago where Bloodborne was completely unplayable. It would boot, but you wouldn't be able to actually play the game. The progress that's been made on this emulator is happening very fast. There's quite a few patches that are required here in order to actually get Bloodborne running at that consistent 60 frames per second. The first one here is obviously the patch that was made by Lance McDonald, with the choice of either 720p or 1080p. As of right now, Shad PS4 has no way to increase the internal resolution of the game you're emulating, though I can only imagine that in the future this will be possible to give us the option to play PlayStation 4 games at a much higher internal resolution. Other things would include the no player light mod, which disables the light that emits from the player character. And the reason why this exists is because a lot of the special effects throughout Bloodborne right now are just overexposed and do not work properly here on Shad PS4. As well as that, the FPS boost created by FromSoftServe will disable a lot of the environmental detail in order to increase FPS. There's also a mod that reduces the light intensity from all light sources throughout the game, as again, the special effects are just a little bit broken here currently. Even still so though, with all of the mods and patches implemented, this still isn't the definitive way to experience Bloodborne, but this is just proof of concept that sometime quite soon we will have a remastered version, albeit unofficial, but a means of being able to play this game at much higher frame rates and resolutions. I personally experienced a lot of issues. It should be known that I'm playing on an RTX 4070 Ti 12GB. My CPU is a Ryzen 9 5900X 12-core processor, along with 48 gigs of RAM. So I've got a somewhat decent rig, but due to the emulator and Bloodborne having some insane memory leaks, it means that it's using a lot more of your PC's resources than what should be required, meaning that if you don't have some pretty decent hardware in your rig currently, then playing this game is going to be quite a challenge. Again, the emulator is very much a work in progress, and as time goes on, further optimizations will be applied. However, when the game is not glitching out and or crashing, it is a wonderful experience just to play Bloodborne at 60 frames per second. Due to the nature of Bloodborne's combat system, given that it's very dodge dependent, the game just overall is a better feeling experience experience with higher frame rates. This truly is a prime example of, fuck it, I'm just gonna do it myself. So yes, Bloodborne Remaster is coming, just not given to us by Sony. You really have to think that Sony are keeping Bloodborne in their back pocket as some type of trump card when they've absolutely dried up all of their other IPs. Their final move here will be Bloodborne remade by Bluepoint for the launch of PlayStation 6. But who knows, the Bloodborne 10th anniversary is due to happen in March of next year. We can only hope something is gonna happen by official means. But outside of that, there is going to be a way to play an enhanced version of this game, finally. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up with everything that's going on here. Check out my other social media platforms. A big thank you to my wonderful patrons. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and we'll talk real soon.